The format for this meeting is a 10-minute speaker, our secretary's announcements, a coffee break and snack break, and our main speaker. Our first speaker tonight is Alyssa H.
Hello, Alyssa Alcoholic. My sobriety date is September 3rd, 2019. Where do I start? So, as a kid, I was always the person who felt like they didn't fit in. I guess one of my earliest memories was just feeling like there was a hole inside me, and I didn't know what that was when I was young. I was never particularly happy. I just sort of existed. And then in late middle school, early high school, when I took my first drink and, other substances, that was it for me. I remember just thinking the first time that I got a head change, like, this is going to change my life. Like, this is what I've been looking for this whole time. And it was, it was all fun and games at first throughout high school. By the end, I'm a full-blown drug addict. I know this is an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. This is part of my story. And alcoholic. And I was still having a good time, and I just went full force into that. In my early 20s, I'd stopped doing the hard drugs, and I thought, I obviously don't have a problem because I was able to recognize when there was a problem in my life and stop it. And so it's okay for me to continue drinking like I want to, because I know that I have control over it. But at the same time, my brother is a homeless drug addict. My mom is dying from liver failure, and I'm seeing all of these things happen, and that's not me. I've always been independent. I have my own place. I have a great job. Like, they're different than I am. And so throughout that time, my brother got sober. He started working a program, started picking up some years, and my mom got worse. And she continued drinking even though her liver was failing. Her health was getting worse and worse. It was super painful for her and super painful for me to watch. And I would be sitting there with her, begging her to get help, saying, I'll go with you to meetings, we'll get you into treatment, whatever. And she just didn't have that hope for herself, and I didn't get it. And I remember just like seeing the fear in her eyes and just being completely unable to comprehend why the answer was so simple, but yet she chose not to do it. Like, it made no sense to me. And, I love my mom. She had a lot of great qualities, but when she finally did pass away, I was like starting to get an idea of that I may have some problematic drinking patterns, but that I would never end up like her. That was never going to be me. I'm Googling things like, how long can you drink every single day before your liver starts failing? And I'm like, I've got years before I need to consider that. But after her death, it got a lot worse for me. I was 24, I think, and suddenly I had all of these responsibilities and things that I'd never had to deal with, like selling a house and selling a car and managing an estate and doing all this stuff. And my family, it's just me and my brother. My parents had gotten divorced, and everyone else lived a bit further away, so it was pretty much just me. And up to this point, all of my relationships had been sort of transactional. I wasn't, and I didn't recognize this until a lot later, but I wasn't really emotionally capable of having any sort of deep relationship with anyone. I didn't know how to relate to people. I was awkward. I didn't know how to have a conversation with anyone I didn't know. And so I didn't have any support in my life, and it was really hard. And I started drinking a lot more, and it got, over the next year or so to a point where I was drinking every morning just because I had to get out of bed. I'm missing work every Monday. People are starting to look at me weird. I started to have liver problems. I started to gain a lot of weight from all the drinking that I was doing, and I wanted to die every single day. And every morning I'd say, this is the last day, and it never was. And this went on for a long time, and I was miserable for a long time. And I started to look at myself in the mirror and see that same fear that I saw in my mom. And so I knew I needed help a long time before I got it. And I did reach out to my brother, who was a member of Alcoholics Anonymous at the time, and said, what do I do? I'm an alcoholic and I need help. And he said, go to AA. And I was like, that seems a bit drastic. What, what I'd known about AA up to that point was his experience. And he was super involved in YPAW. He did all of the conventions. And that sounded awful to me. I didn't want to go into a room with a bunch of people I didn't know and play board games. No. So I continued drinking. But in the back of my mind, I'm like, my mom was willing to lose everything, including her life, for this. How much am I willing to lose? And I knew that if I kept going the way that I was going, I would start to lose all the same things she did and, be just as miserable. And it came to a head. The guy I was dating was a great guy. He'd put up with a lot of my crap. I'm blacking out every single day. I don't. Okay, thanks. I thought you had a question. And he broke up with me, and that it really hit me because he was a good person, and I knew it was 100% my fault, and there was no denying that. And so that day, I went to my first AA meeting. I walk up, there's all these guys smoking cigarettes outside, and I start to turn around to leave because I wasn't walking in there. And they pulled me in, and that ended up being my home group. And for weeks, I'd go into that group of 7 dudes and just cry at them. And they were just so great about it. And so my journey with AA began, and I started taking direction. And part of my history is that I've always been like a very logical person. I'm an engineer. Everything needs to be factual or it's not real. And for me, emotions aren't real because they're not based in logic. They don't make any sense. I don't acknowledge my own, and I don't acknowledge yours because they're not logical. And so I knew that I had to give this a shot or I was going to die. And I was very afraid coming in that I wouldn't be able to do that I wouldn't be able to accept that there could be something greater than myself and to work through that. But I was willing to give it a chance. And so I had to put my reservations aside and all of the fears I had coming in that people would judge me. They would think I was strange for not drinking. I wouldn't have any friends. I wouldn't have any hobbies. My life was going to change into something that I didn't know. And a lot of those things did come true. My friend group did change. I did have to go into these groups of people and talk to people that I didn't know, and it gave me a lot of anxiety for months. But I did it. I got a sponsor. I worked the steps, and I started to recognize these things about myself, like the emotional unavailability that I had no idea existed, and the fact that I was hurting people in my life by not acknowledging that their feelings were valid and my own. And it took a lot of work over the past few years to sort of start working through that and building connections with people and learning how to be vulnerable with you and with anyone, learning how to sit in a room with another person and have a conversation and learning how to relate to people. And I've had a couple experiences in the past year that have really made me see how far that I've come from where I was when I started. It's really hard to see the progress along the way. One of those is my brother. He relapsed last year. And the past year has been me shuttling him to rehabs and psych wards and all of these things. And it culminated in him being arrested for attempted murder, which is completely out of character for him, not a violent guy at all. And it's been really difficult on our family, obviously, learning how to deal with this. My parents aren't alcoholics, and they don't know what to do. They want to take him, they want to put him somewhere, they want to fix him. And it's been just a really cool experience to be able to be there for them. I don't think I've had an emotional connection with my dad until this point in our lives when we can have these conversations and I can be there to support them and help them to set their boundaries and help them to understand this disease better. It's been also very cool having the support system that I have now. When I found out, my best friend showed up at my house immediately. Lots of people took my phone calls. And within a couple hours, and completely not by my doing, everything was set in place. We had a lawyer. We'd figured out how to write him mail. We figured out all of these things. And it just came together because of all of the people in my life and because my higher power was taking care of me. Another thing that happened was I've been presented with a lot of great opportunities in my career since I got sober, again, completely without my input whatsoever. And recently I took an opportunity to become a manager. Like I said, I'm an engineer. I don't like to talk to people, and my job my job now is to sit with people and help them navigate their problems every day It's communication, and it's dealing with other people's emotions and validating them and helping them work through their problems. And I think about this on a daily basis, that there's no way I would ever be able to do this job, not just not being sober, but without the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, because you've taught me how to relate to other people. You've taught me how to deal with not only my problems, but with other people's problems. So I'll end there with just that I'm super grateful, not only because I don't feel like I want to kill myself every day, but because I've become such a better person throughout the work I've done here. Thanks.
All right, now I'm going to recite the Serenity Prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. Now, our main speaker will share his experience, strength, and hope with us. Please join me in welcoming Michael R. from Belmont Shore.
Michael, alcoholic. Thank you. I'm just going to put this right here real quick. And Long Beach, California, and my sobriety date is September 20th, 2005. And so thank you for having me tonight. And Alan, thank you for inviting me, and welcome to the newcomers. And thank you for your 10-minute share. I really appreciate you guys coming out and supporting me. And a lot of good friends came out tonight. It's good to see you here. And I'm just humbled and grateful. Whenever I'm sitting up here or standing up here and sharing, I'm humbled and grateful to be sober tonight, and I'm going to tell a little bit about my story, later, but today my life's really good. And if you're new and you're struggling, this program works. When I first got here, I had drank myself homeless, and I was in complete chaos and a lot of fear and a lot of pain. And I didn't have any solutions, and all the ideas that I did and all the things that I did to myself and to the people around me, I hurt, and I just ran for a long time. And, I got sober when I was 35 years old, and I thought my life was over, and today my life's amazing. It's really, really good. And I have calmness in my heart and in my head today, like I've never had before. And when I first got here, it was the exact opposite. I couldn't sit still. I had just the thoughts that would literally switch in a split second. It was just all over the place. And today it's really good. And, I'm just so grateful. So I live in Long Beach, and I go to a lot of meetings over there. My story is about alcoholism, but it also has drugs in it as well. I grew up in the South Bay. My mom and dad, we lived on 9th and Studebaker in Long Beach. My dad worked for Mattel Toys for 30 years. My dad was this really handsome guy, a good-looking guy and hardworking. Had a really good moral compass. But he would just get super angry, and I knew as a kid, I thought my father was always mad at me. He didn't have the communications skills to be able to nurture that relationship with me when I was a little boy. My mom was beautiful. She was like Natalie Wood, beautiful. My ex-wife used to say she was so pretty that she can get away with bad behavior. And she suffered from mental illness, and it was genetic. Her mother had it, and her mother's mother had it, and so she had witnessed it. And so when I was a little boy, probably from recognition, probably 5 or 6, my grandmother lived with us, but she didn't talk. She would just sit at the table and eat, but she wouldn't talk to us, because she didn't have the ability to communicate. And my mom was just not processing it well, and so my mom drank a lot, and she would just kind of disappear, and I remember when I was probably 6 or 7, she took off, and she was in Hawaii for almost a year. And my dad, I guess I would say he was doing the best he could. And then my mom came back, and we were still a family unit, but it wasn't a family unit, And then I have a brother also who's 3 years older than me, and him and I, we physically look the same, but mentally, the way we communicate is complete opposite. He's angry all the time, and he wants to fight, and he would beat me up all the time. And I'm not a fighter, I never was. I'm the sensitive alcoholic, And so from that age of recognition all the way, until about 10 years old, I'm just all over the place, My parents, I don't really understand, like as a father now and as an adult, like, my dad is a really intelligent man, but why is he moving us around like every 6-9 months? I went to 20 schools, and it was just incredibly like challenging, to walk into that campus and, like start over and start over and start over. And then also the learning stuff, it was just really challenging. And, I don't know, there was a point where I just kind of gave up, and it was like probably when I was like around 11 or 12 or 13, I just didn't care anymore. And it really affected me. And, that's my childhood. It was just my dad's yelling, my mom's, crying, my mom's drinking, my dad's like doing weird stuff. And my dad married a neighbor. Like, my mom and dad split up, and he married this neighbor, and like we moved in. We sold the house that we were living in, and my neighbor and my friend is now living with me. You know what I mean? When I'm like 10 years old, and it's just this weird experience. And Reed's 3 years older than me, and Reed was he was just a character, man. I loved Reed. I knew him since the 2nd grade, and this is my stepbrother. And Reed was the exact opposite of my brother. Like, he was a nice guy, and he really loved me, And so he was more of like a brother figure to me, believe it or not. And but he smoked cigarettes and he smoked weed, and like he would sneak the car out, And we lived in Huntington Beach, and like literally I'd be in the park, and I'd see this Mercedes-Benz going through the park and the police chasing my stepbrother. And I was like, I got to get home because I'm going to get blamed for it, right? And but that was my stepbrother. And when I was probably like in the 6th or 7th grade, because they're older, they're in high school, I started smoking weed and drinking beer and doing all the things that you do, And it just, like we always talk about, it gets progressively worse, And by the time when I was probably in the 6th or 7th grade, I made the decision I didn't want to live with my dad anymore because he's just never there and he's always angry. And so I decided to go live with my mom. And, my mom, again, doesn't have the tools. She's emotionally not there. She's drinking. And, I can manipulate her, really easily as a, 12, 13-year-old boy. And I did. And, I'm living with her, and we lived over in Torrance, and, I was going to middle school, and, there was this period when I was in like the 6th and the 7th grade, or 7th and the 8th grade, which was probably the best time of my life, as a young kid. Like I had my mom was more stable in where she lived than my father. So my mom lived there, and then she lived in Palos Verdes, like Merrill Est area, for a long time. And then she moved down into San Pedro, and she lived in that neighborhood for like 25 years. And so I had this period like when I was in the 6th and 7th grade, and I'm drinking on the weekends with my brothers and stuff, and I'm having that experience, and I'm smoking weed, and I'm doing all the things, skateboarding all through Hermosa Beach and Manhattan Beach, and doing all the stuff that you do as a kid, not coming home and just being that that kid. And by the time I get to high school, the drinking just keeps getting worse and worse, and, start like, getting introduced to some other drugs. And, it's crazy because it's like I have a daughter right now who's 17, and, when she was 13, I look at her and she's just this little baby, and I'm like, how is it that I was drinking and smoking weed at that age? And when she was 14, I was starting to do, drugs. And by the time I'm 16, I'm fully addicted to drugs. It was cocaine. I had got introduced to cocaine, and man, that like literally took me down for like the next year. That's all I did. And so I'm 16 and 17-year-old kid doing cocaine, and I drop out of school, and all the things that you do because priorities are just skewed. And my mom has no control over me. So my mom calls my dad, who's now moved to Texas, and he lives in Dallas, and he'd left Mattel, and he'd started a company in Dallas. And I go out there, and hair down to here, and I'm just like, my dad is like, he's just this guy that like I could tell he's just disappointed in his son. You know what I mean? He doesn't talk to me, and he's just really disappointed. And he's like, what are you going to do with your life? You're a loser, this, that, and the other. And so I took the GED when I was supposed to be a junior in high school, and I enrolled at college, because my dad said that that's what I should do. And so I did. And, I went to college for about one semester, and I started my second semester, and I'm just drinking all the time, because I said I'm not going to do that other drug anymore. And so I'm just drinking. And within 9 months, I just, I can't stop. So I'm at that point where I'm like, what am I going to do? And I can't go to my father. And so I had this experience where I was like, I'm just going to join the Army. I'm just going to do a geographic. And so I joined the Army. And, I joined the Army, and next thing you know, I'm gone again. And it's like my story, if from a child, I'm all over the place. And then, there's this period, from high school where I went to 3 high schools, went to that college. Now I'm in the military. In the military, you're always moving. I'm in El Paso, I'm in Oklahoma, I'm in, Seattle, Washington, I'm in Iraq, I'm in Bahrain, I'm in, Germany, I'm all over the place. And I'm just drinking. And it's like these 3 to 6 month periods of time. So people don't even know who you are. You know what I'm saying? And they're doing the same things that I'm doing. And it just got progressively worse. And, and I'm just drinking all the time. And, my life is just like, I'm so close to achieving certain levels of, accomplishments. I've gotten all these, these opportunities that, you have when you're a young person to go to school and, educate yourself and to, establish some foundation for yourself in the future. And I'm just like that close. And then I leave, whether it's in a relationship or job, where I'm at, it's always something, but I got to get out of here, and that's been my MO my whole way through, and so I get out of the service, and somehow, I made it all the way through, and I didn't get a dishonorable discharge. I actually extended a year because I wanted to go to Germany. I had that experience. I'm not doing that drug. I'm just doing I'm doing the other stuff, whatever else is there, but I'm not doing that one drug. And, I had that experience, and, I get out of the service, and, I go back to college, and I'm actually doing pretty good. I'm just drinking on the weekends. I'm not doing a full-blown alcoholic. I'm just a heavy drinker. And, I'm 23, 24 years old, and, I had this job, working as a teacher assistant at a high school in Plano, Texas. And, I was going to college, and I was going to be a school teacher, and then I was working at restaurants. I was really hustling, because I felt like I was always trying to make up for lost time. And, I was always trying to, present myself as more than I am, because I feel different. And, nobody even cares. That's the funny thing, is nobody cares about anything, but my mind is telling me that. And, so forever I'm always trying to make up for, all those years that I lost in college, and all those years I lost in high school. And, all my friends at the high school that I went to over here, I'm thinking that their life is great, that they're down on 2nd Street in Hermosa, and they're having fun, and they don't have problems like I do. It's all, whatever. And, it's weird, fast forward 20 years later, because I didn't go to my first 10 year, I went to my 20. And it was so crazy how many people were going through some of the same stuff that I was. Alcoholism is real, and it's just wild, and it's really hard to see some of those people, that are going through that. And I found that solution. I found this solution here, Alcoholics Anonymous. This thing works, and I've been lucky enough since the day I walked into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous that I haven't had to take another drink, and that's an amazing thing. And I'm just broaching the insanity. And so I get out of the college, I'm going to college, and I'm working at the school, and I get this opportunity at a software company, and I go in there, and I'm working really hard, and I'm drinking, all the time. And they offered me this position where I come in at 3:00 and I get off at 11. Which is perfect, because I can, get off work and I can go to the bars at 11:30 and drink until 2, and, kind of stumble my way home and, fall asleep, and then get up, at 10 o'clock in the morning and, do it all over. And I started drinking. Now it's 7 days a week instead of the Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. Now I'm a 7-day-a-week drinker. And, my roommate, I created this lifestyle where my roommate, Joe, is this bartender at the, this great bar in Dallas, and he's a partner in a restaurant, and we're friends with all these people at restaurants. So you can literally go and drink until 2, and then they close up the place, and you can drink until 4. And then, after 4, the people come over to your house until 6, and it's just that's the insanity, and then, when I was in in 97, I had this experience, and I was in this relationship with somebody, and I was in love, and that's where I always get taken down, is when I'm in love. And, she and I had met when we were at the school. She was a physics teacher there, and just an incredible woman. And, she went over to Poland and had an abortion. and when she came back, she told me about it, and, I was crushed, and because I wanted to have a family, and I knew, like, my life was, like, a mess, and I couldn't figure out why it was that I couldn't, accomplish certain tasks, and I had this experience, and I broke up with her, and I got, really depressed for like the next 6 months, and my drinking went to a whole different level. And I went to my roommate, who they were doing a lot of cocaine back then, and I was like, can I get some cocaine? He looked at me, he's like, are you sure? Because he knew my story from when I was 17 or 16, and I was like, yeah, and it started then, and it didn't end until '05. For the next 7 years, that's what I did. I literally worked and stuff, and then I would go do that. And for the next 5 or 6 years, I put myself in situations. I left Texas on a bus or a train. I came out here on a train with like $40 on me. I got rid of everything that I owned, and I had nothing. And I came out here and I started over, but I didn't start over. I came out here exactly the way I left it. Like, I had no solution. I didn't walk into Alcoholics Anonymous and ask for help. I wasn't telling the truth to people. I was lying to you constantly about all the things that I was doing, And, it's weird. It's like, now I look back on it as a father, and I'm just like, and it's not their responsibility, we're all on our own journey. So, and in my fourth and fifth step, I don't hold my dad or my mom, responsible for any of this. I really don't, but I would have loved it at 17 for my dad to sit down, really have a communication with me about what is going on here, instead of yelling at me, I'm a loser, And the point of all that is that hopefully, wherever you are is wherever we're supposed to be, and we have to go through what we have to go through, and all the pain and suffering to get to where we're going to be. But it's just like, when I got to that one moment, and when I was leaving Dallas, I brought it out here, and I started it right on over, and it just got really gnarly. And I found this position, working in sales. I'd never done sales before, and it was telephone sales, and half the company was drinking and half the company was sober, and they're all PG guys, and we would be over here drinking, making fun of the PG guys, and we had a picture on the wall, and it was like all of us drinking down here at like Sharky's or whatever that place is down here in Hermosa, and it said the real PG group, and it was all of us drinking, and I'm like, now that I'm sober, I feel like that's such a slap in the face of those guys. They're all fighting for their lives. And we would carpool with these guys. Some of the PG guys, and it was funny because they would tell me their story. About what they did, and they would tell me the same story like the next time I'm in the car, and then they would say the story again. I was like, why is he repeating himself? And then I realized he was sharing his experience, strength, and hope, and that's what we do. And they saw that I was an alcoholic, but we can't tell you that you're an alcoholic. You have to make that decision for yourself. And I remember that guy that was driving, his name was Daryl Ray, and Daryl lived in Palos Verdes, and he was a member of the group up there on the hill. And, I remember when I got sober, I went to go look for him, and he had died of cancer. And it was one of those things that I really wish that I had saw him, because I wanted to thank him, for trying to reach out to me. Because not a lot of people, at that point in my life were really trying to reach out and trying to help me, because I definitely wasn't trying to get help. I was just trying to I was full of excuses. And, I'd just show up to work on like Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays, and I would be like just in pain, like the pit in my stomach, and as soon as I'd get off work, I would just, get to the place where I was going to drink, and I was going to go do that drug. And like, as soon as you get it in your hand, that like all of a sudden that comfort, you know what I mean? And, God, it was just a horrible existence. And I saw some stuff, I was in places where, literally, I was driving a guy around and dropping stuff off, and, I would get stuff at the end, and then I'd go find, a spot, and, I'd drink until, 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, and then I'd try to make my way into the work. And, but in that time frame, I was in places watching people, drink to levels of just insanity, and I was watching people die. And there was a moment where I was like, I knew I was in trouble, and I knew that I couldn't control it anymore. And I was just like, what am I going to do? And then I just succumbed to it. I was just like, I'm going to die. These people around me are dying, and I'm going to die too. And I was okay with it. And so that's where I was. And, that was probably in 2004. And I did one last geographic. I went down to San Diego, and, I went down there for like 6 months, and I'm just going to drink, and, that's all I'm going to do. So I was, going to work, and then I would drink, at night. And then my cousin came by, and he brought over like a, case of beer and an 8-ball. And I'm not lying to you, by the end of the night, I was on a bus back to Long Beach, with a broken hand, and that's how my story looked like, and so at that point, this is like 2005, the beginning of 2005, I end up over in Long Beach, and I'm in a homeless shelter. I'm unemployable. I have a backpack, I have a little bit of clothes. I don't have any money, nothing. And, I meet a guy, a homeless guy, and he's like, you should go down to GR, register at GR and get yourself $200 a month. And so I go down to GR and I get $200 a month. And I'm in this shelter called the Samaritan House, and it's on Pacific and Anaheim. And there's heroin, crack, meth, everything going on in there. And I had this moment, I'm 35 years old and my life is completely over and I can't stop, and I'm like, I'm going to die. And I went into the bathroom, and it's like 2 a.m, and this guy was in there. He was probably like 65, 70 years old, and he was in his boxers, and he had lined up all the soaps and all the razors from everybody showering, and he was shaving his head, and he had blood coming down the side of his head. And I'm just like, if I continue to do this, this is going to be okay. Like, this is what my life is going to be, And I'm like, I can't do this anymore. And, I went out of that place that morning, and, I sat on the curb, and I had this moment where I'm like, it was the same thing that I had said, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times before. I don't want to do this anymore. But in the past, whether it was, 10 minutes or 1 hour, I'm right back at it. And this time the obsession was gone. I didn't want to drink, and I didn't want to go do drugs. I just didn't want to do this anymore. And so I went to the VA hospital, and I walked into the hospital, and I told the truth for the first time. I drink every day and I do drugs every day, and I can't stop. And they offered me, to go upstairs to this place called the Substance Abuse Treatment Center. And there was a lady up there named Martyrs Perez, and she wasn't friendly, at all. She yelled at me and, told me to sit down, and I waited all day, and then she locked up at the end of the day, and I left, and I went and slept in bushes, on Bellflower and 7th. And the next day I went over there, and, and I sat in that room, the waiting room outside, and watched TV all day. And then she came in and she said, had me do a drug test, and I had drugs all in my system because I've got, 20 plus years of drugs. And she yelled at me and told me to get the hell out of there. And I'm like, I haven't done drugs in 2 days. And she's like, come back tomorrow. And I did that for like 6 or 7 days. And I finally gave her a clean urine test, and she got really excited. And she gave me a bus token and a little piece of paper on where to go. And I followed the jigsaw puzzle to the VVRC, which is the Veterans Villages Recovery Center. And it was a 30-day program. And there was a guy there by the name of Nathan Burton. And Nathan was an intake clinician. And Nate was like the nicest guy, And he introduced me what was happening, where I was going to be. And, I have like 5 or 6 or 7 days of sobriety. And, I'm in a bad place, and I've never been to an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting in my life. And he told me that there's an attitude adjustment meeting in the morning. You're going to go to it every day, and then there's going to be group sessions throughout the day. And I'm like, okay. And he put me in a room, and I literally had to sleep with the lights on, and it was bad. And about day 3 of being there, I had like this experience where like I went to go to the bathroom and I couldn't see. And like, I guess I had something like literally like this stuff over my eyes, and I couldn't hear. And it was just like, I don't know, my body was shutting down or something. They 911 me to the hospital. I had maybe 12, 13 days of sobriety. And, it's crazy. And they put me on, whatever, the IVs and all that stuff, and got my body back to whatever. And it's like 4 a.m. and they give me a bus token, and I'm in Long Beach trying to get back, to this place. And it's just, the people are doing drugs, and 4 o'clock in the morning in Long Beach is not a good place to be, anywhere but Long Beach, and I don't know, I made it back, and I didn't even know my true sobriety date, because honestly, I stopped doing the drugs around the 11th or the 12th, but that first clean test was on the 20th, so I took that day. And because when people say that last drink they remember, I don't remember the last drinks. I don't remember any of that stuff. It was a fog, and it was insanity. And So I get in there and I do that 30-day, and I do another 30-day because they're like, you need to stay for another 30. And I did a 90-day outpatient program there, and I lived in the sober living on the premises for like 6 months. I lived there almost a year. But before all that happened, when I got to probably 25 days or whatever, they let me go out to outside meetings, and I went to this one meeting called the Artist and Musician meeting up on Signal Hill. It was a little sound studio by a guy named Mike Mart. And Mike was an old guitar player. He played with the Red Hot Chili Peppers, and he was not a nice guy. Mike was just gruff and angry because he had missed his shot, just by that close, and but an amazing guitarist. And I'm not a musician, I'm not an artist, but they let me go to that meeting, and there was some really interesting people in that meeting, But I have 25, 30 days, and there's this weird experience happening for me that I hadn't experienced as an adult, being honest with you. I haven't, I didn't have that experience where I was excited in a long time. And I met this guy in that meeting named Scott, and Scott had 4 years, and he was working with people, and he was going to meetings, and he had a sponsor, and I asked him to sponsor me. He said he would, and so I'd meet with him, and I'd go over to his house, and we would read out of the big book, and we did the first 164 pages straight out of the big book, and we did all the the different steps in there. And I had this experience, and I already knew I'm an alcoholic. I mean, I knew that 10 years before I was an alcoholic. You don't get to the level of drinking and drug addiction that I was and not think that you're not an alcoholic. I don't struggle with that. I didn't know how I was going to work this to stop that obsession when it came. I didn't understand that process. I didn't think that there was a part in the book that talks about constitutionally capable understanding. I thought my constitution was completely skewed, that it was never going to come back. I thought I had lost my mind and it was never coming back. And so, I really did. And for the first 5 to 6 to 7 years of sobriety, I really had to hang on, And I went to meetings every day. That was one of the things. And I did the steps with Scott, and I did I wrote out all the inventory, and I read it with him, and we talked about the character defects, and we did all that, and the 8th and the 9th step, and I made amends to, so many people, literally, I must have said I'm sorry probably 500 times, and I did it verbatim like we talk about, I didn't hedge it and say, oh, I did these things because of whatever, I'm an alcoholic, and when I drink, there's all bets off, and the big ones were my mom and dad and the family. And I remember my dad, I went out to his place out in Redlands, and, he married a second neighbor at this point. So now he's left the first neighbor. Now he's married. I'm not lying. He's married a second neighbor, and it's a whole thing. And that's my dad's story. But, he and I, we sat there in the back, and, one of the things was that my dad would come out when I was drinking, and see me once a year, and we'd have dinner, and I could just feel his disappointment. And, for the first time, I'm probably at about 7 to 8 months of sobriety, and I can feel my dad actually, he's happy, and I have integrity for the first time, and I'm communicating to him with honesty that I hadn't been doing. I'm always having to lie to him about what I was doing before. And I explained to him, the 12 steps and the 9th step, Dad, is I'm here to tell you that I'm sorry for the things that I did, and I did those things and more. And I'm here to make it right. And, and then, just shut up and listen to him. And, he sat there and he just, he started to cry, and my dad's not a crier. And, it was a very emotional experience. And it was amazing. He told me he's proud of me, and that he just wanted me to stay sober, and continue doing what I'm doing. And honestly, that's what I've been doing this whole last 18 and a half plus years, whatever it is, almost 19 years. And it's been this incredible thing. But that experience with him and that relationship that I had from that moment on till the day he died, it was just on a level that I had never experienced before, and I became a true son to him. And, I'm really proud of that. And I know it's not me. I know it's my higher power. I know it's the group, and I know it's the people that that I've gravitated to in Alcoholics Anonymous over in Long Beach. And I'm telling you, man, there's some really solid people in Long Beach. I one of the groups that I go to is Seal Beach Speakers, and I've been going to that meeting forever, and that's where I saw Alan at. And, I've heard them all. All these great speakers have come through there. And, and I love, that not all speakers gravitate to each person. You know what I'm saying? But if you stick around here long enough, you'll find your people. And that's what I love about Alcoholics Anonymous. I may not relate to you, but just keep coming back until you find somebody that you do. And, there's a couple of people that I did, and, man, that meeting has like just solid sobriety, and, and they, there's a lot of politics and, pomp and circumstance, but when you get down to the brass tacks of it, it's a solid meeting. And, and that's what I love. And, when I did the steps and I got right into, raising your hand when you're willing to sponsor somebody. So like I've got a year and a half, and I'm sponsoring people immediately. And I feel like I'm a sham, because like I said, this part in the book where it talks about sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly. For me, it was slow sobriety. Like I literally didn't think this thing I was going to make it. Even when I had plus a year, and, because I would leave and I would just have so much tension because I thought it was going to go away. And, I would talk to my sponsor about it honestly. And, the thing about working with others is for me, it's the key. It's not just working with sponsees, but it's working with my sponsor and, with other people and communicating to them honestly about what's going on with me. Because if I come up here and I'm trying to be like this cool guy or whatever that is, like I'm missing the whole component of what this is. This is about me being able to come here and share with you the things that are hurting me so that we can heal together, and that's it. It's not that complicated, and I just need to keep it super simple. And, so what I would do is I would get a sponsee, and I just literally finished, doing the 12 step or my steps like, 3 to 4 months ago. Is I would read out of the 12 and 12, whatever step we were on, so that my brain was in that thought wave of like, the first step or the second step or the third step, and then just continuously stayed willing enough to go and work with those people. And that, it's so crazy because, when you stay sober, your life's going to get better, believe it or not. Like if you owe 5 years of taxes like I did and you pay those taxes, your life gets better. If you stay sober for almost 19 years and you go to work all the time, your life's going to get amazing. You know what I'm saying? You're going to be able to do things like buy a home and, put money in the bank and put your daughter through college and do all the things that you dreamt about when you were drinking, but you weren't able to do. But because of Alcoholics Anonymous and because of the steps and because of my relationship with my higher power, I'm able to do those things today. And it's not me. It's not me. It's you and the step work and this connection that we have in here that does it, because it's contrary action. Like, when I'm drinking, I want to just take that money and go do what I want to do with it. But when I'm sober, I'm packing that money away and planning it out and being a good person, to the best of my abilities. And, I was married to a woman in the program, and she didn't stay sober. And at year 5, she, went off and did what we do. And, now I've got a daughter who's in kindergarten. And I'm the company that I was working with at that, when I was drinking, now I'm working for the owner, and now I'm running his company, and it's just this insane thing. Like I'm unemployable, but now I'm the boss, but now I'm raising this 5-year-old who I don't even know how to braid her hair, and people are teaching me how to braid her hair, and it's just these amazing things. But you're thinking, I can't do it. I'm not going to be able to do this, but you do. I would just get up in the morning at 5 in the morning, and I'd pray and meditate, and I'd get connected to Alcoholics Anonymous. I'd get into that 11th step, and whatever it's going to be, it's going to be. I get my daughter rolling, get her breakfast going. She'd be on her little thing watching TV, whatever, and I'm getting ready for work. And then I get her in the car and I drop her off, and then I'd haul ass all the way over here to Redondo Beach, and we'd work until 3, and then I'd roll all the way back over there and I'd grab her, and it was amazing. And this, the selfish part of it is that, unfortunately, my ex-wife had to go through her experiences. She didn't come back until later. But my relationship with that daughter is at this level of like, oh my God, it's amazing, and it's the gift that I never thought that I was going to have. And oh man, and the part where you're, when you have 100% custody of your kid for 2 or 3 years, you get to see all that stuff. And then I felt bad for my ex-wife, because I knew that the pain that she was in, and I really thought she was going to die. She went through this whole thing, and she was gone. And I had to do the whole divorce thing, and I had to create this thing to protect my daughter. And I had found this really nice lady as a lawyer who's a mother of 3, and I followed her direction verbatim like I would my sponsor, because I didn't want me to come into this, and I didn't want to screw this up. And, I created these, my lawyer created these things called ramp ups so that Erica would get 20%, 20%, 20% until we'd be to 50-50. and she would lose it and it would start over a couple of times. And the last 8 years, we've been 50-50, and I had dinner with my lawyer and I was like, the plan you executed worked, and it was amazing. And the point where I'm going with this is that when I'm drinking, I'm not capable of doing that. I'm selfish, and I'm going to remove my daughter from that person, and my daughter's the one that suffers. It's not about my ex-wife, it's about my daughter, And now they do have a great relationship, and that's my ex-wife and her experience with her daughter. That's her business, and I'm just grateful to be a part of all this. The thing about this whole process for me, right, is that I've had a really interesting life. I had moments when I was a kid. I love reading books. I love art. I love travel. I mean, I've been, to all these places. I've been sailing sailboats since I was 6 years old, and I sail as much as I possibly can. I'm blessed, and but I remember when I was young, I'd read these books like the Kerouacs and the Ginsberg stuff, and I had this idea that I could do those things that those guys were doing, and for a while I could, and then I couldn't. And it's so crazy because this expansion of your mind and the level of where we're at today, when I thought that I had to do a drug to get there, and now I don't. I can sit here with you and I can expand my mind in different areas, and I've went through a lot of loss, and I've been in a lot of pain. When I was younger, I was in a lot of pain, and I've had a lot of pain in the 18 to 19 years of sobriety, a lot of pain. And, I lost a lot of family members, and, relationships have been just really challenging for me for, whatever reason. I was married to my ex, and then I was in 2 loving, relationships for 3 and 6 years that didn't work out. And, that quality that we get in relationships because of Alcoholics Anonymous and the emotional sobriety that you've given me has created this ability to be transparent with people, and I'm super grateful. But then when it's gone, it's painful, like I was telling you about when I was younger, and it came back twice in the last 10 years. And there was moments where I was like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to stay sober, and what I did is I leaned into Alcoholics Anonymous, 2 years ago when this last relationship ended. Like a newcomer, I was going to the morning meeting, and I would go to meetings at night. I was doing 2 meetings a day. And I'm 16 years, 17 years of sobriety, and that's what I needed to do. And I shared in there, this is what's going on with me. I'm in pain, and, it's I know it sounds like it's all doom and gloom. My life is amazing. It really is. But there's going to be moments when it's not amazing. And that's where, I have to be diligent in my program, or else the drink can come back and it can get back on the table. And I know what that looks like, and, it's not going to be Allen Ginsberg and, Jack Kerouac and Big Sur and all that kind of stuff. It's going to be some seedy motel, in San Pedro, the rebels on Pacific, drinking until 2:00 in the morning and doing what we do in complete oblivion, But there's moments when, we think that it's not, and that's the insanity. And, I get to work with these other guys. I've been blessed to work with, some sponsees, and one of my guys, he's been really helping me. And, he had an experience. I'm not going to share his story, but he literally almost died. And, this is recently in the last year and a half, he almost died. And, he came back and he's this close to dying, and he's coming up on a year, but he drank again after he almost died. And I had to watch that. We watched that, and it reminds me of what that looks like if I was to be that, And so, where I'm at today, is like I was telling you, I'm humble and I'm grateful, that I get to be in this one area of my life today, because I have clarity on a level that I've never had before. I've been in pain this last couple of years, but that pain that I was in 2 years ago, a year ago, it was just like that obsession that was removed. It went away, and I, not going to 2 meetings a day, but I go to a meeting every day, And just like I did in year one, in the morning, I get up at 5 in the morning, I do my prayer and meditation. I read the 3rd step, I do the 7th step, I read the St. Francis. There's a little prayer that I've written for me. And what I do is I write a prayer out for wherever I'm at that I need to stay focused on, and so that I could be of service to others, and to stay out of my own will and all the fun stuff that I like to create. And then I do a morning meditation, and my morning meditation roughly looks like this guided woman's voice. She used to be English, but for whatever reason, the podcast is no longer English woman, so now it's this new voice, and it's good. But I go down that little journey of meditation, and what my meditation looks like is prayer, and then the meditation, I hear the solution. And then once I'm done, then I apply that solution to whatever it is that I'm feeling. And I'll tell you, that's a really tricky thing depending on where you're at in sobriety, because if you're in your first 30, 60, 90 days, your prayer and meditation, you may want to run that solution by your sponsor, because it might look like going to Mexico, right? Mexico is not the solution today. Today it's to get in here to the meetings and, work through whatever we're working through. And, I was honored because I was at that Seal Beach meeting that I used to sit in the back when I had 20, 30, 60, 90 days. And, I got the coffee commitment, and that's where I met my ex-wife, because she had a coffee commitment. And then I had all the different commitments in there. I did all of them, and I got to listen to all these great speakers there. And then they asked me to be their secretary last year, which was crazy, because it's you're just thinking, I was looking at all the names, the Honeycutts and the Deckers and, all those great names, and then I'm on there, and it's just I'm humbled, and, I just want to carry the message, daily. I want to be the best version of myself today. I know I'm not perfect, I just want to come in here and hopefully, help somebody and not harm anybody. And, being that secretary that ended in July, it was an honor. And, I got to hand it over to Marianne W. And now I'm helping her with a little bit of the transition. But, I don't know if you understand what I'm talking about, but if you've been to some of these big meetings, on the West Side, you have the PG groups and Bellflower Big Books and stuff. If you ever get that opportunity to do that kind of stuff, it's the highest level of gratitude for me, And, I kind of wanted to end it on a couple of things about the newcomers, If you're new here and you're in fear, or you don't think this thing's going to work, I hope that you'll stick around long enough to, meet people in here that you can connect with. And the way I mean that is that if you're at 30, 60, 90 days, or you're at 3, 5, and 10 days, whatever it is, find a couple of people that are doing their best right now in that one moment, but they're also taking direction from people in here, they're sponsors that have 4, 5, 6, 10 years, whatever it is, but those people are also working with people that have 20 to 30 to 40 years, and where I'm going with that is that when I was brand new, I had lost everybody's trust. You know what I mean? There's nobody giving me their keys to their house, And my sponsor was sponsored by a guy named Dr. Steve Severance. And, Steve had a group, and Doc had probably 30 years. And it was Mike Mart and Dave Cerna. And, there's just all these guys that had 20, 30 years of sobriety. And that's who I would go have dinner with. And I would sit there and listen to them and how they recalculated their lives and turned into these amazing people. And where I'm going with that is you have your people that you're running around with, but where is it that you're taking your direction from? And that's the person who's worked their steps, with others, and then are working steps with somebody, and then are practicing all these 12 steps. We're over here, right? And your life can become amazing. And I just want to thank you for this opportunity. So thank you.